Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not my Lord was crucified, knowing not it was for me he died on Calvary. Mercy that was great and grace was free. Pardon that was multiplied to me. There my burden so found liberty at Calvary.
I'm back. Let me just get myself together. Hello, it is a wonderful, beautiful day. So I just give thanks, as always, to the good Lord above. I am back and I will be reading from the oracles of God. So if you got your Bibles, let's go ahead and dive in. Today we're going to be in the book of Genesis. Let me get my little thingy here. Okay, there we go. So we're going to read from the book of Genesis, and it's going to be chapter 41 and 42. I'm going to be reading from the New King James Version. So let's get started. All right. Genesis 41. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Verse 2. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadows. Verse 3. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. Verse 4. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine looking cows and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. Verse 5. He slept and dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Verse 6. Then, behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. Verse 7. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Verse 8. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Verse 9. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day. Verse 10. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. Verse 11. We each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Verse 12. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. Verse 13. And it came to pass just as he interpreted for us. So it happened, he restored me to my office, and he hanged him. Verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved, changing his clothes, and came to Pharaoh. Verse 15. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have a dream. I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. Verse 16. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Verse 17. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. Verse 18. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Verse 19. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. Verse 20. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7 and the fat cows. Verse 21. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. Verse 22. Also, I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. Verse 23. Then behold, 7 heads, withered thin and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. Verse 24. And the 7 heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Verse 26. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. Verse 27. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. Verse 28. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Verse 29. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. Verse 30. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. Verse 31. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. Verse 32. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Verse 33. Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Verse 34. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. Verse 35. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Verse 36. Then that food shall be a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. Verse 37. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. Verse 38. And Pharaoh said to his servants, Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? 39. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. Verse 40. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Verse 41. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Verse 42. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. Verse 43. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, Bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Verse 44. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Verse 45. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephaniah Paneah, and he gave him as a wife Ashna, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Verse 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Verse 47. Now in the 7 plentiful years the ground brought forth abundantly. Verse 48. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Verse 49. Joseph gathered very much grain, as the sea of the sand, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. Verse 50. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, whom Ashna, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bore to him. Verse 51. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. Verse 52. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Verse 53. Then the 7 years of plenty, which were in the land of Egypt, ended. Verse 54. And the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. Verse 55. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, do. Verse 56. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. Verse 57. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all lands. All right, so now let's go over to Genesis 42. Now when Jacob saw there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, Why do you look at one another? Verse 2. And he said, Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die. Verse 3. So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. Verse 4. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. Verse 5. And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Verse 6. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brother came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Verse 7. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, where do you come from? And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. Verse 8. So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Verse 9. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land. Verse 10. And they said to him, no, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. Verse 11. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies. Verse 12. But he said to them, no, but you have come to see the nakedness of the land. Verse 13. And they said, your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more. Verse 14. But Joseph said to them, it is as I spoke to you, saying you are spies. Verse 15. In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Verse 16. Send one of you and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. Verse 17. So he put them all together in prison 3 days. Verse 18. Then Joseph said to them the third day, do this and live, for I fear God. Verse 19. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain for the famine of your houses. Verse 20. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified and you shall not die. And they did so. Verse 21. Then they said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded for us, and we would not hear, therefore his distress has come upon us. Verse 22. And Reuben answered them, saying, did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy? And you would not listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. Verse 23. But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. Verse 24. And he turned himself away from them and wept. Then he returned to them again and talked with them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Verse 25. Then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. Thus he did this for them. Verse 26. So they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from there. Verse 27. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of his sack. Verse 28. So he said to his brothers, my money has been restored, and there it is in my sack. Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, what is this that God has done to us? Verse 29. Then they went to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan and told him all that had happened to them, saying, verse 30, the man who is Lord of the land spoke roughly to us and took us for spies of the country. Verse 31, but he said to him, we are honest men, we are not spies. Verse 32, we are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan. Verse 33, then the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, by this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me. Take food for the famine of your households and be gone. Verse 34, and bring your youngest brother to me, so I shall know that you are not spies, but that you are honest men. I will grant your brother to you, and you may trade in the land. Verse 35, then it happened as they emptied their sacks that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. Verse 36, and Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin? All these things are against me. Verse 37, then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. Verse 38. But he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair in sorrow to the grave. So thank you so much for listening and being here with me. Join me again. Um, and until next time, I love you and have a great day. Bye.
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of his spirit, washed in his blood. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior